Hi, everybody. I'm Peter.
I'm Chris Gardner. I'm a senior staff writer at The Hollywood Reporter, and thank you. And this is Peter Hedges. Peter, thank you for Peter Hedges.
Thank you for coming out. So glad to see you.
I'm so glad to see you too. Thank you for doing this. It's an honor to sit next to you. And can I embarrass you for a second?
Yes. It won't be hard.
So Peter Hedges is a novelist, playwright, screenwriter, producer, and director. He wrote, directed, and produced Ben Is Back, which you just watched. In 2003, he made his directorial debut with Pieces of April. His other work includes Dan in Real Life, The Odd Life of Timothy Green, the books What's Eating Gilbert Grape, which he adapted for the screen, yes. Lots of fans of that. And was nominated for an Oscar, which he adapted Gilbert Grape for the screen. He wrote the books The Heights and An Ocean in Iowa. He was nominated for an Oscar for co-writing About a Boy. And this is his latest. And I was in Toronto for the world premiere of Ben Is Back, and Julia Roberts said from the stage that that if you don't cry if you're not crying, then there's a reason to be alarmed. Because Peter Hedges cries a lot. So I feel like if you don't cry, I will not have done my job. But I wanted to start here. You know, Ben Is Back is fiction, but it's deeply personal for you. Can you talk to me about your mother and how she influenced and inspired?
He's going for the tears. Yes, I grew up in a family that was ravaged by alcoholism. My mother walked out of the door of our house when I was 7. I didn't know her sober until I was 15, when after 3 attempts at rehab and near death, she, the third time, stuck. And for the last 22 and a half years of her life, she devoted her life to helping other people get well. And so I write a lot about mothers, and I write a tremendous amount about family, and I think she's a large part of why. But what happened in a more recently was that someone I knew overdosed and died. An actor, my favorite actor ever, overdosed and died, and a relative nearly died. And I wanted to write about this epidemic. I just didn't know what story to tell, so I began a period of research that went for a number of years. And I just talked with a bunch of people, and I read every article, and there's so many articles, and saw documentaries, and just did a tremendous amount of research. And it took a while until I hit upon this idea. It became so big and so unmanageable and so unaddressable for me. But I did find once I decided to write about one family over the course of one day, it felt like that was something I could do, and that I could, with the help of the many people who helped make this film, we could put a story into the world that would be a part of the bigger conversation. So.
And that 24 hours a day is even more profound for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why you decided to do this one family on this one day? Because I know that you learned a lot through your research about how people seem to be doing so well.
Sure.
Just one day.
Yeah, but the thing that I kept hitting upon, and what's happening is that there's just been a tremendous amount of shame for many years. Early, when AA started, they started AA as an anonymous fellowship, because if people knew you were suffering from the disease of alcoholism, you could, lots could go wrong for you, and anonymity has been very key. And one of the great things that happened through that movement is that the veil of shame started to be lifted over time. But that isn't happening at the moment with the heroin opioid epidemic. There's just a tremendous amount of shame. But what is starting to happen, because 70,000 people are going to overdose and die in America this year, and it's an astonishing number of people, and it will be a larger number next year. But what's happening is they're, in obituary after obituary, people are now saying why their relative or their loved one died. And what struck me in so many of the obituaries, I started collecting them. It sounds morbid, but so many stories I just kept finding. The number of times that somebody had 2 months or 6 years or 20 years, and then they had slipped, or they in a moment, and sometimes nobody could even see it coming. This moment would occur where their loved one would go upstairs and not come down. And so I wanted to write from a place of someone who had some recovery, who had some hope, but not enough really that you could even the family can relax. So that was kind of the thinking. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. You did great.
Thanks.
Great.
All right. Woo! All right.
You have proven your skill in writing mothers, which you mentioned, and you've never written a mother like this.
No. And I wanted to write a love story about a hard thing, and I was very interested in. While I don't want to make Holly too noble, because I think she makes many mistakes, the one mistake she doesn't make, though, is she doesn't give up. And it's tough, because in every dynamic, sometimes you have to be really hard and tough, and sometimes the loving thing doesn't feel loving, and sometimes the thing that feels loving is actually enabling. So we can spend hours and hours talking about it, but when I started to write this, it was going to be the story of a sister and a brother. And I was writing it, and I happened to have a remarkable sister who would go into the underworld to bring me back if I got lost. But that felt like maybe there was even a greater love to explore. And while I'm a father and I love my kids and I believe fathers do love their children, I think when a mother, well, Whitman, I just love to say this, Walt Whitman, my good friend, but when he wrote about the Civil War, because he was really such a great articulator of what was occurring, when he described soldiers dying on the field after they'd been wounded, they never called out, ever called out for their girlfriend, or their wife, or their father. Every time, it seems, in my reading anyway, they were always calling out for mama or mother. And so maybe this is my great fantasy, that my mother would come rescue me, breathe life into me at the end. Maybe. I wasn't conscious of that. I just knew that Orpheus is my favorite love story, and I wanted it to be one family member going into the underworld to bring the other family member back. And once I made the choice for it to be a mother and a son, the script it didn't write itself, but it started writing me. And it was a very joyous process, writing this very hard thing.
Thank you for that. There's so much to talk about in that, because I switched to a mother and a son. You have a son. He's in the movie. He did not want to do it. But first, before we get to that, I wanted to see if we could start with Julia Roberts, because this role just seems to be calling out for her. So what was the process like in getting her for this?
Well, the process was that we sent the script to her agents, and they liked it a lot for her. And then I wrote her a letter. I'd met her twice. I'd seen her once. I saw her. I've never told this story publicly. There was a famous restaurant in New York called Columbus, and it was where all the cool people went, and I was very poor and struggling, but I knew a manager of actors, and he managed Eric Roberts, and we went to this restaurant, and someone came up and said, look, I'm working with Eric's little sister to the manager. Would you like to meet her? And I had been looking across this restaurant at this beautiful young woman. I mean, she must have been 18. I was probably 23 or 24. And I kept thinking, who is that beautiful girl? I'd so like to meet her. And came up to this manager, and he was like, I don't want to meet her. And of course, it was Julia Roberts. I was like, come on. She wasn't Julia Roberts yet. She was just Julia Roberts. But then she became Julia Roberts. Anyway, so I wrote a letter, and then I heard that she read the script and very much responded to it, and that she could talk to me in a couple of weeks. But I knew that I wanted to make the movie this past winter, and I said, and this was out of character for me, I said, I don't know where she is in the world. I will go there, but I need to speak to her in the next 2 days. And they came back and said, well, she happens to be going to be tomorrow in Malibu. And so I think about 12 hours after I said that hubristic statement of, oh, I have to see her, I was sitting before her in Malibu, and we had a wonderful conversation. I came armed with a list of actors that I thought would be great to play Ben. Lucas was not on that list. And these were actors who had either read the script or their agents read the script, and they're rather prominent young actors and very good, and they'd be very good in the part. But I wanted to be prepared for that question, because that's going to be important for her if she does decide to do the movie. She never wanted to look at the list. She said, Lucas needs to play this part. I said, well, first of all, he's not available, and at that moment he wasn't. And also, he doesn't really want to make a film with this dad. And it's not that he doesn't like me, it's just he wants me to be his dad and not be, I think one of the great joys of being 20 or 21 is you're either away at college, or you are, in his case, working and getting to do what you love. And it's kind of wonderful to leave home and to not feel home right there with you. But Julia, I think her interest in him doing the film, and then he started to hear from his friends, because all those young actors are friends, and they're so supportive of each other. It's really neat that your dad wrote a really good script, and he read it, and he really gave me a great gift, because he didn't need to do this film. He had just filmed Boy Erased, and he had every right. He deserved a vacation, but he knew that this is a very personal story for me, and he liked the role very much, and he loved the idea of working with Julia, and he gave me a great gift by doing this film, because I never thought he would do it, but the minute Julia said he needs to do it, then I became possessed in my mind, in my heart. I was like, yes, Julia's right. But at the same time, it's been so wonderful to watch him make his choices and carve his own way in this strange world of film. And I didn't want to put any pressure on him. The movie was going to happen. He just decided to bring his incredible talent and merge it with Julia's, and they had such a great chemistry. I mean, don't you think? And I mean, I can't tell you what a joy it is. I wish I could say that was my directing. It was the casting, but it was their generosity. Some actors who are of note, the great actors are generous, in my opinion. But many actors that we love are not generous. They act alone. But Julia and Lucas didn't act alone. They played off each other. And every scene that you see in this film, particularly if you take the 12 or 15 big dramatic scenes, I could have cut and shown you 6 or 7 different versions of each scene. Very different. Quite amazing. And one of the things I really feel about film, certainly my films, that if you see a film of mine and there's a performance that doesn't ring true, it's my fault. It really is. It's because they brought it. And if there's a moment that felt skipped or jumped, it's me mostly, maybe my editor Ian, but it's on us. No, it really is. And if they're great, you give them all the credit, because there was an inevitability about what they did, along with Courtney and Catherine and everyone else. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, that's how this should go.
Okay.
Can we talk about one of those scenes where they sort of
Sure.
go head to head?
Yeah.
I know you said, it feels like the movie takes a turn when they return from the Christmas Eve service, but it actually, to me, feels like the scene in the dressing room is where it switches, and that scene, I know you said, is like a microcosm for the film as a whole. Can you talk about that particular scene, what it represents for the film?
Chris is referring to the dressing room scene. Do you remember it? No, I mean, you might be thinking about Green Book, which is apparently an amazing film. What am I saying? That scene, for me, the movie starts to really shift when they go to the mall, because prior to that, they've been in the, hi Carol, that's my first straight girlfriend right there. Sorry, I just saw you. That's awesome. Wow. That's nice.
Carol, we're gonna have questions for you.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. That scene, Ben is just he's gone to a meeting. Who is he calling on the phone? I mean, there are all sorts of questions. He sees Spider in the mall. That triggers something for him. He says, I need to get to a meeting. And then, of course, the young Kara Kay is her name. We didn't say her name in the film, but Alexandra Park, an amazing actress, plays the girl who says, you were my dealer. And so that scene starts, and you see in Ben this, I mean, one of the things I deprived Lucas of, or whoever the actor was to play Ben, because he's clean at the beginning of the film, the only time he uses drugs in the film is at the end when he's unconscious. So that kind of delicious acting opportunity that I think one would really like, you don't get. Now the young actor David Zalbar who plays Spider got to. That's why I created Spider, because I wanted you as an audience to experience someone who was dope sick, because it really informs why people spin out and why they give up their babies and why they do all sorts of horrible things because they're dope sick and they're not getting high. They're basically in so much physical agony from the withdrawal, which was something I thought I knew a lot. I didn't know that until I started researching it. They don't get high anymore. They're just trying not to feel sick. So anyway, that scene, for me, why I love the scene is that you don't know. When Lucas started making choices in that mirror, he became an animal and a creature, and I kind of saw what he must be like when he's using, or when he's about to use, that like he'd become a different being in that moment. And Holly, of course, is oblivious, and she's just on her task of getting him dressed. But we're seeing this side of Ben, and of course she gets. I'm just recounting the scene now. But for me, what I loved about it was in any scene where the characters go from A to Z and back to B and then down to Y, that's pretty thrilling. And so he is this. He's definitely, his mouth's watering. He's wanting to use. He goes in. One of the questions in our conversation when Lucas and I were trying to figure out whether this was a good idea, we met, and he had this question about why Ben says you didn't check my shoes. It was one of his big questions. What was that? And I had a much simpler idea, but in talking with him for the hour we talked about this moment, he said, I think there's a part of Ben that really wants to be honest. And I think it's one of those moments that blurts out. And I loved how he did it. But that conversation led to the notion of, we could also go into the dressing room and shoot Ben's point of view. And I hadn't written that. I rewrote the scene to include those shots. But what you see is Holly, you see her hope, you see her buoyancy, and then of course the minute the door, he closes the door, and we added the click of the lock, because we didn't have that, and the dressing room didn't have a lock, so we made the sound. But even by dropping in where we do editorially, and you see that change in Julia's and Holly's face, it was so thrilling. And that scene was shot with just basically 3 masters. A master is a shot where the camera played all the way up until Ben closed the door, and then we were on Holly until she starts pounding on him, and then we had the third shot was when we followed her out. The scene, that last part of the scene was supposed to be shot outside, but there had been a blizzard, and normally you get 12 hours to shoot in a day. We shot that entire scene in 5 hours because we needed to get the crew out because another blizzard was coming. And anyway, there were a lot of things that make that scene so special for me. But what I really love about it is that you see Ben's deception. You see that there's the biggest moment of affection in the film, which was something that Lucas and Julia found together when he kind of ducks his head and hugs her. I so love. I was very angry that day because we didn't build a set of the dressing room, so we couldn't, quote, pull the wall. So I was very limited in how we could shoot the scene, and I thought if I'd had more foresight, I would have insisted on that. And I went to Julia and I said, I'm really sorry. I can't come around and really shoot you. It's not gonna work. And she found a way, and she's such a pro. That beautiful moment when he says, this is embarrassing, so that we're really on Lucas, and she's digging in the pockets, and then she just, if you ever see the scene again, or actually the New York Times has you can go home and watch the scene again and hear me talk about it. But I don't talk about this. Julia found a way to just turn and say, no, this is love. And she's almost kissing him. I mean, it's not sexual, but there's that much intimacy in it, which I loved. And then that second half was supposed to happen outside, but we couldn't because of blizzard and it was cold, and we'd have to move to a different location, and there wasn't time. So we reinvented the scene so it all happened. And then as we were doing it, I said, would you ever consider just saying, what the fuck are you looking at? Or and she said, oh yeah, I'll do that. And there are 8 takes of that shot, of that third master shot, and each one she gave a different phrase. Like she never did the same phrase. And I would love to just have them all 8 in a row, just so you could just play them on a loop, because there's something about Julia Roberts' fierce mama bear just saying, you know, totally going after Lucas. Also, the scene ended up playing much more violent than I thought it would, and they thought it would. But we did a rehearsal. I said, we'll just go to this point. But they kept going, and I thought, okay, let's see what they do. And the minute they started going at each other in that dressing room, and because we couldn't pull out the wall, so sometimes what happens in a film is the best thing can happen is the thing that you think, oh, this is going to completely restrict us. So I've come to really love limitations. So we needed to shoot that scene in 6 hours because we needed to get our crew home. And that forced me to think in a simpler way about how to do the scene. But then we found a way to do it where it really allowed those 2 actors to go at it. And that to me is what the film is. It's this push-pull love story between a mother and son.
I don't love limitations, but we're going to have to sort of wrap this up quickly and open it up to questions from the audience. But can I selfishly just ask you one question, a 30-second answer?
Sure.
Can you tell me
a 30-second answer?
I'm proud. While you guys think about your questions, is just tell me about the last scene and how many takes you did and what.
Sure. I did 4 takes. Only needed to do 2. Lived mostly in the second take, but I asked for a 3rd take because I just felt like I maybe wanted some variety. And then I realized that we had a second camera which was shooting on Lucas, and it was shooting wide. And so I asked for a 4th take because I wanted to pop the lens on his camera so that we could be really close on him. And I'm so glad we did that fourth take, which we actually do use. It's a combination of the fourth take of everything on Lucas. Those two shots on Lucas are the fourth take, and the beginning of the take, because she did a really nice thing with yanking off the belt. But we mainly lived in take two. I mean, the truth about Julia Roberts is that her first takes are astonishing. They're staggering, almost always. Lucas, too, reached a point where, they were bringing it right away. But sometimes in a film like this, you want to play a bit because I just wanted a little editorial room. And sometimes I just liked watching them do the scenes, so I just kept asking them to do the scenes over and over again. But that one we did 4 takes, but we would have been fine with 2, but swap the lens so we get the close up.
It's a great staggering scene, and that's what you can do when you're the director, keep them working. Questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you very much for being here. My question is as to why it's sort of set around the holidays. And
Sure.
There was a specific scene where Ivy sings "Oh Holy Night" that I thought was kind of a really powerful scene where, he's kind of crying.
Right.
And I wonder if there's any specific significance to that scene.
Sure. The question is why set it around the holiday. One of the things I needed for the engine of the plot was why would Holly want him to stay home? And if I thought, well, it could be for maybe someone in the family is winning an award, or Ivy's graduating from high school. Could be one of those events. But Christmas for me is it's a big deal, and it's for many people. It's a time when we're supposed to be happy. But it also felt like that might be something she would wish for. And she says at one point, I shouldn't have said I wanted him home. And she's taking responsibility for the fact that he came home. So there was that thought. I also made a film called Pieces of April, which is set around Thanksgiving. It's not as if I'm going to go through all the holidays now, but I did want to get back to making that kind of raw, real, elemental kind of filmmaking. It's just been a personal ache of mine to make another film in that spirit. Handheld, feels very real, like you're peeking in on life. So there was that. I'm the son of an Episcopal priest, so I'm a sucker for church scenes. It had been mentioned to me that maybe I shouldn't start the movie in the church, but I wanted to. But what I ended up, the wrinkle I added was by having Holly say to the kids, "Do you guys really want to be coming to church every week?" And so there was something kind of great about someone who's got her kids in the pageant and they come to church for the holidays. But very few kids, in my experience, just are like, can't wait to get to church. So anytime you get somebody in your life who kind of raises those questions, they end up helping you. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Yes. I'm going to do fast answers.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed.
Stripes.
Yeah. Stripes.
How'd you come up with the dog's name?
Ponce. Oh, okay. True story. We have 2 young men as our sons, but we went once to, but they're highly allergic. One son in particular, and we went when they were young to a place where there were many dogs, and there was this completely wild-looking dog named Ponce, and I don't think Ponce was the dog that maybe was in my son's lap, but there was a point where as he was just petting this dog, he just started breaking out all over his neck and his face, and tears filled in his eyes, because he knew, and we knew, he couldn't have a dog. We later got 2 dogs that were they're not allergic to, or not allergic enough. They're slightly allergic to, but not enough that we can't deny them the dogs. So, but I just love the name Ponce as a dog. Great question. Never had that question.
Great. That's a great question.
Yeah. Top it. Somebody top that question. Stripes is in the lead. So you did very well. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
My question is, once you had settled on the Orpheus idea,
Yes.
what were the things when you were writing that you
sure.
That's a great question.
Great.
Also, to Peter overcame writer's block to write the screenplay. So if there's any writers in the room, you can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that I'm happy to talk about that too. One of the frustrating parts about people who suffer from alcohol or heroin or prescription pills is the cyclical nature of it. And I get very angry at those in my life. And I think it helped me to not fall. I didn't want to write that cycle over and over and over again. I just wanted that cycle once. So one of the ways I avoided that was by narrowing the time frame. Also starting Ben where he was. The second half of the film, I don't write films that are this intense, where from the very beginning you're nervous and on edge. So I was anxious about that. I'm anxious whenever I'm not in my sweet spot. So I was nervous about that. Mainly I was nervous about not, every family or every person who deals with this has a different story, but I wanted it to ring as true as possible. Also, there's some concern when you cast one of the great, I think our greatest movie star, and one of the great movie stars in the history of movie stars. But that became not such a problem when she showed up, and there's no vanity, there's just a ferocity and a fragility and a willingness to go anywhere and go everywhere for this part, and also as the character. But I think, movie like this, something's out of place, something's a little off, and it can all unravel. So I leaned on a lot of people. I leaned on experts. I talked to a lot of people. I had friends of mine who've suffered from heroin or other drugs have, read the script and pushed me. Holly was easy for me to write. Ben was harder. I can write Holly in my sleep. I'm Holly on some level. Much more Holly than I'm Ben. I believed Ben in my first draft. I believed everything he said. And all of my friends who know more about this world than me said, no, he may be saying what he'd like to be true, but he's lying a lot. And so, anyway, I hope I answered that.
One more question.
I'm sorry.
So make it good. You're competing with stripes. Let's go through
No.
that.
Thank you. Peter, can you talk a bit about your process as far as writing? And do you have a place where you write?
Great question. I write at home. For many years I had an apartment, a studio apartment nearby where I wrote, but then the kids moved out and we have a house, and why am I going to an office when there's my wife and the dogs? They're very interesting, and so I go home. This process was, you referenced this, I had hit a spot where I lost confidence. Every project I was doing was taking twice as long. I was starting over. I wasn't writing to a level that was satisfactory to me, and so I went into intense therapy. A traditional therapist who, always had a pad ready to prescribe something, and I'm not a person who takes anything, so that was a big deal for me to even contemplate that. And then I also worked with a cognitive therapist to try to develop some strategies did I have ADHD? Was I depressed? What was it? This may be too personal, but I'm going to be honest. So what happened was, one day I was working with my traditional therapist, and we had 10 minutes left, and I mentioned something about my ideas file, or on my computer I have a whole bunch of ideas that are in files, She said, what's that? I said, I just have some ideas that, I've started, half formed, half finished. She said, well, tell me about that. And I started well, I have this story, I got this story about this, and I did another one, and I went, and I just kept talking the way as you can see, I do, but I was just going and going and going, and I looked up, and she had tears in her eyes, and she's not a person who I even knew if she cried. I mean, she's just very tough and smart and good. And she said, oh, no, you're not depressed. Oh, you're not depressed. You just haven't been telling the stories you're supposed to tell. And after the election, however you feel politically, I find this to be just an unbearable, untenable time. We're so polarized. My relatives and I don't agree politically. I can't sometimes even call them on the phone. I'm so upset. And I'm sure they're confused by what I feel. But the truth seems to be co-opted. Everything's shaky. Nothing's grabbable. And I felt that one thing I could do creatively was try to become the most honest and the most authentic in my work. What if that was one of my responses to this untenable moment? Was I just committed to making the boldest work I could? So what I did is I carved out a window of time. Apparently this is not a great verb, but it's my favorite verb. I gifted myself 6 weeks. I had about 10 pages. Prior to that, I had signed up for a writing workshop with a former student of mine who had a writing workshop, and I signed up. And I went to study with my student. And I wrote 3 pages over 3 weeks, each 3 weeks. I had 9 pages of Ben is Back. And then I gifted myself those 6 weeks. And in 5 weeks and 5 days, I wrote a draft. But what helped me was I went back to my roots, which was that I would write, and we had some young actors, some of Lucas's friends were living in our home over the summer because they were on break from drama school. And then there were actors in my neighborhood that I would call up and say, can you come over at 4? I might call them at noon, and I had fresh pages to read. About every 5 or 6 days, I'd read a bunch of pages. And I was getting more and more confidence, and I'd get a rough draft of 75 pages. And then a week later, I had 85 pages, and a week after that, I had 95 pages. And in 5 weeks and 5 days, on the 4th of July, 2 days before my birthday, I had a draft. And then I did 2 small rewrites of that. But I did years of research, and I'd been wanting so much to write in response to all that untenable loss that I mentioned earlier. But I also felt empowered because she'd said you aren't telling the stories you're supposed to tell. So I looked at all of the stories I wanted to tell, and I thought which one might be the most, cost me the most to write, but also I'd feel the most purpose in my attack or my attempt, but also what might be of the most use. And all those kind of married together, and then this window of time that I wasn't desperate in it. It became very joyous. It was the happiest I've ever been as a writer, ever. And it's led to just a period of rebirth. One of my other teachers, a really brilliant writer, both of these teachers brilliant, but the previous teacher that I'd signed up for a year before, I took a class at the Y, and this writer, I came to the movie the other night, and her name's Annie Baker. She won a Pulitzer Prize for the flick. She's brilliant, and young enough to be my daughter, but brilliant. And I told her about this hard time I've had. She said, you know, we don't appreciate hard times enough. She said it better than this, but we need these times. These are the times where we find out who we are. And with a lot of help, a lot of love from my family, and a lot of support from my friends, and some professionals giving me some tools, I found my way back, at least momentarily, to passionate connection to the stories I need to tell. And I so appreciate your coming out tonight and listening to me, and thank you, Chris, and for your support for the film. It's so meaningful. And thank you all for coming.